Welcome to a special edition of the Darden Admissions podcast. I'm your host, Brett Twitty, and you are listening to a new episode. On this episode of the podcast, I'm excited to share a recent conversation from our ongoing Office Hours Faculty Spotlight series featuring Professor Peter Debaere. Peter is a member of the Global Economies and Markets faculty here at the Darden School of Business, and I recently caught up with Peter to talk about his background, what led him to Darden, several of the elective courses he teaches, including his Economics of Water class, as well as a book he recently published with his brother, To America and Back Again, all about his grandmother's life. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. So without further ado, here is my recent Office Hours conversation with Professor Peter Debaere. All right, well, welcome in, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this latest installment of our ongoing Office Hours conversation series. This is our Faculty Spotlight. It's brought to you by Darden Ideas to Action, which features all kinds of great research and publications from Darden faculty, as well as Darden Admissions. We think this is a great way for you to meet incredible people who teach the students here at Darden. And we're joined today by a member of the Global Economies and Markets faculty, Peter Debaere. Peter teaches in the full-time MBA program as well as the executive MBA program. And so, Peter, thank you so much for being here and taking time out of your day to join us for this conversation.
All right. Yes, it's a pleasure to be here. I think it's a great initiative to whoever started this. Kudos to him or her.
All right. Well, and to our attendees, just a couple of things, but as we kick off, we'll take the first 15 minutes or so to kind of talk a little bit about Peter's background and how he ended up here at Darden, and then we'll start to transition to his work, his research, publication, some of the things that he's been working on recently. If you have questions as we go along, I imagine you might, please feel free to ask via the Q&A. We're going to turn off the chat now, but we will keep an eye on the Q&A. And so, Peter, let's start with what I think is a really very basic question. Tell us a little bit more about you. Who are you and your background?
All right. Yes. So most relevant, I guess, for Darden is I'm an economist. Right. So probably as I speak, you already hear that there's a bit of an accent. So people typically want to figure out where I'm from. So yes, I grew up in Belgium. Right. So that's where the accent comes from. So I mean, a bit as an international economist, that's really my specialization. I live an international life. So my wife is from Germany, right? So she's actually a historian, right? So and I have two children, right? So one is an engineering student at VT, and the other one is much younger, is 9, right? So and they all speak our languages. So it's a bit of a mess for those who have dinner with us. So there's German, there's Flemish, and there's English spoken, right? So, as I said, my specialization is on the one hand, international economics, right? So topics like globalization, that is really what I care about. At the other hand, it's the case that, and this is about 10 years ago, that I started working on water, right? So the economics of water. And these are two topics that are dear to my heart. And I have the opportunity at Darden to basically teach those things and at the same time do research about them. So I'm in a happy place.
Well, how did you get interested in economics? It's always interesting to hear how faculty got to the area where they really spent their life and career.
So it wasn't a direct road to economics. So I come from a family that was a bit artistic, where there was lots of interest in cultural things. So it was kind of natural that, and we traveled a lot. So it was kind of natural that I wanted to study languages. So I studied German and literature and philosophy. So, and it was actually to that extent important to me that I considered going for a doctorate. So I had a scholarship to go to Germany. So in Germany, I took my first economics class, economic history. And I felt like that this way of merging theory and empirics, right? So that this way of trying to explain a society, that this was giving me more traction than the cultural philosophical angle. But I should say that I'm happy that both are in my life. My wife is a historian, cultural historian, and she is from Germany, so this element is not completely lost. So, but that was basically how I, by staying in Germany, taking economic history classes, basically then said, okay, I'll go back to the drawing board and I'll start from here. And then basically I did things in a fairly quick time and ended up in the United States in Michigan, University of Michigan, to do my PhD. So that's the road.
Well, did you always know that you were going to come to the US for school? Was that something that you wanted to do, or did that become clear as you went down the economics path?
One thing was clear, that I would study abroad, right? So we had traveled a lot. So I remember the first year that I started at university, one of the first things I did was basically go to the international office and figure out what it would take to get abroad, right, and get scholarships, and what I had to do, what the hurdles were. Yeah, so that was clear. But then with economics, I mean, these were very prestigious scholarships that I had to get. So it was difficult that you would say, look, yeah, I'll get this, because there were like 30 in Belgium who got these things, right? But yeah, as I was progressing in economics, increasingly, since economics is still to some extent dominated by the Anglo-Saxon world. I mean, it has been changing, but so certainly when I started, so it was clear that if that would be your specialization, this would be very helpful to come to the United States. Yes, that's true. That definitely was the case.
So how did you get to Darden?
How did I get to Darden? Well, basically, I was before at the University of Texas, right, in Austin. So my wife was finishing her PhD. And then we basically had to look for 2 jobs, right? So University of Virginia was one that wanted to hire both of us, right? So my wife teaches in the history and German department, and I'm here at Darden. So and I must say that to some extent, when I started here, I did not really know all that much about the school itself and its particular approach. So it was a learning process. So it probably it's similar to students who come here, right? So they have read about it, right? So, but in the end, I feel like it's when you're here that you understand what this whole thing about case method, case teaching is about, and the community. I mean, I had heard about it. People had talked to me about it, but it's only when I was here that I really got a sense of what this really was about. Yeah, I think that's true.
Well, it's interesting to hear you say that, because you're someone who's been recognized over and over again for the excellence of your teaching and the experience that students have in your classes. You were featured on a Faculty Friday not so long ago on Darden social media, and it was great to see all the posts from students about how much they loved your classes and how much they remember from the classes that you've taught. And so have you always been someone that had that passion for teaching? Sometimes when you start down this sort of academic world, people start to think a lot about research and publication, yet Darden is a place where it's both things, right?
Well, yeah, it's both things. It's, for me also, it's both things. But I should say also that so my parents were teachers, my brother's a teacher, so it's been something that was important. So it's like almost given to me in my DNA, right? So there's something which is almost addictive to teaching, in the sense that next to doing research, of course, is that and I feel this most when I teach in the first year, right? So when I teach the Global Economics and Markets class, right? So that there are many people who have never taken economics, right? So in this, this is a very condensed course. That's for sure. So but you have this opportunity to open people's eyes and have them look at the world that surrounds them in in a somewhat different way, right? To think about how incentives matter, right? So how the global economy, how these different countries interact with one another. And especially when you teach the first part of economics in the first quarter, which I did in the EMBA part, right, is that you see people's eyes open, right? And this is incredibly rewarding. And then especially also, and that's another motivation, is that to teach it for a group of students who in many instances will actually play a leading role in society, right? So to help start that conversation about how the economy works and how a firm fits in there, and how once you see or understand how the economy works a little bit, there's got to be a way in which that will translate in how you'll run your operation, right? So, and I think this is incredibly rewarding to have that conversation, right? So, and for me, I need both. I need teaching, I need research. So it's like if I have been in the class too much, I feel like, okay, now it's time to really get down to the nitty gritty again, right? So, and after a period, so like, as I said, so I'm now in a period of research. After that, I feel like, okay, it's time to come out again. And so I need both. It's for me an equilibrium that works well. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's been fun to talk with faculty about the case method on these conversations, because for many of our prospective students, they've never learned in this way. It doesn't necessarily reveal itself. The name doesn't exactly tell you what it is. How do you explain the case method and what you do in these global economies markets class in your electives with prospective students?
That's right. So I would, when you say case method, I think for me the emphasis is on method, right? So it's a way of teaching which, as an instructor, your tool is basically the question. You can ask questions, right? So when the students are the ones who basically, they have studied the material. They are the ones who have to give content, right? So, and it's that interaction, that game of me asking questions and students providing content, right, that build this class. And so and I emphasize method very much because, for me, it's a way of teaching. It doesn't really matter whether it's really strictly speaking, a case. So for me, this can be a video, can be a speech, can be an article, right? So I think that's really important. And then what's nice about it is that that it's a way that fits very well the profile of our students, I think, right? So that, yes, you got to know how things fit together, or in this particular case, how the economics work. But in the end, and I think our graduates really excel in this, is that you got to be able to explain this in everyday language, or with some precision, though, right? It's not just chatting, but you have to be able to explain that to the people that you lead, right? So so the communication is incredibly important, and the setting, right, of us asking questions and students responding is basically a friendly environment to train these skills. And I think it's very relevant, not only for MBAs, but especially for them, right? So I make the case that basically it's a way of teaching that's incredibly valuable. It's much richer than just going through PowerPoints, right? There's way too much of that, right? So I would suggest that it would be good. And you see some of that also in other disciplines, that people have more attention for this higher level way of teaching, right? So as I said, I came from an economics department, right? So I was a fairly interactive teacher, but it actually does take some to find your own. The same way that we also said that students have to find their voice, right? The way they can operate that's in sync with who they are. I mean, for a teacher, that's the same. You got to find your own way of expressing yourself, right? That's in line with who you are, and students will notice, and you notice that yourself. If that, so, it does take quite a bit. I mean, I remember one of the things that for me was an initial challenge, and I mean, and I think it later on turned out to be some of my strengths. But initially, so when you ask a difficult question, and I'm a bit hard-nosed, so I asked the difficult question, and the answer doesn't really get you much further, right? So how to respond to that, right? So, and initially I would just bring in somebody else, but that's really not how this should work, right? So, and then basically this technique to really take smaller steps, get to a point where we've all learned something, and the student who was struggling in particular has learned something, right? And then release and open it up, right? So that's something which I struggled with initially, but which I've kind of finessed, right? So, and it's become something that's sometimes a fairly fun part of the deal, right? And so I think my sense is that many students know that that's how things operate, right? So in that they'll have to do this little dance with me, right? So, and we'll get to a point where we resolve things, but there may be a moment where we actually struggle a little bit to figure it out. Yeah.
I loved your point around sort of the parallel paths, right? Students finding their voice and finding their footing. And of course, this is a journey that faculty have been on as they teach here. And the thing that's come through so clearly in these conversations that I've really enjoyed spotlighting for our prospective students is just the craft that the faculty have for that time. You know, the care and attention, the fact that they're thinking a lot about how they're teaching and how they're engaging with students in the classroom. Peter, I wonder, I mean, you obviously taught a number of classes here at Darden. Do you have a favorite case, something that you always look forward to the conversation about?
So, I mean, there are many, but so there's one case which I like in particular, and it relates to it's the first case actually from my Global Economics of Water class, so which is this one class on water. Right, which is about the Renaissance dam that Ethiopia is building or has built on the Nile, right? So, why do I like the case? Well, so it's when students take the water class, many enter with a certain preconception about what really the big issue for water is, and many will say, "Look, you know, the wars of the future will be about water," right? So, I mean, I'm sure you've heard this phrase, the wars of the future will be about water, right? So, and this is very much, people who make that argument very much look at water in a very limited way. They see it as really a matter of supply. You got enough water or you don't, right? Whereas the whole thing, I mean, the purpose of the course in a certain way is also to look at it more broadly, right? I mean, there's not only supply, there's demand as well, right? So, and there's lots of things that you can do if there is scarcity, if there's not enough water, right? To live up to that situation. Yes, one is to very narrowly focus on supply. The other one is to say, you know, maybe I can use my water a lot more efficiently, right? So from the perspective of Egypt, right? So, I mean, they are wasting lots of water. Yes, there isn't much, but they are using it very inefficiently. And if you actually start thinking about this, working on the demand side and on more efficient use, you would be a lot cheaper than engaging in war, and it's actually beneficial, right? So it's this. I mean, so for the many times I've taught, each time it's this aha moment that comes through very strongly, right? That suddenly, all right, we got to open this box here, right? So and that's where this framework of economics comes in, where you say, look, all right, what are the different aspects that we have to look at if we want to understand the phenomenon of water, which is typically taken for granted, and typically the predominant view is the one that's on supply, right? And this is a bit in line. This is a bit in line with how water historically has been studied, right? So it's been a field dominated very much by engineering and environmental science, right? So it's only like in the last 10, 15 years, and I mean, the nice thing is there's an openness, but there's in the last 10, 15 years that really also the engineering folks and the environmental scientists have opened up, and they realize that, look, if we're gonna solve some of these water issues, it's not just a question of what do I construct, right? So this thing's got to operate. There is the human factor. You've got to get people to agree on this, right? So and it's there that basically the social sciences increasingly play a role and have to play a role, right? So that's where the nice thing about the water topic is because it's water's everywhere, right? So that it basically puts you almost by default in an interdisciplinary setting, right? So this is incredibly rewarding. How I mean, it's on the one hand humbling, right? Since look, you work with people from all different fields who look at the world differently, have different methodologies which you all don't necessarily understand, and have their own emphasis, right? So to then juggle this, right? So so then as I said, the nice thing about this Renaissance dam case is that this brings this at the start of the class, brings this very much to the fore. It's like, all right, this is where we stand here. Okay, let's unpack this.
How did you get interested in this particular topic, Peter? You mentioned that you came to this kind of economics of water, looking at this particular question about 10 years ago. What sparked for you?
So I mean, so this is in a way it's a coincidence, right? And it's one tied to Darden in a way. So I'm not sure if I would have gone someplace else that this would have happened. So as you know, right? So there are lots of people coming through at Darden, right? So there's too many people. You could basically spend every day talking to people who come through, which you should not, but you could, right? So there's often invitations that you get to talk to people who have a question. So, and I'm fairly selective in these, but now and then I say, all right, yeah, okay, maybe this looks interesting. So there was somebody from the Nature Conservancy who was looking for somebody with a sense of economics who could talk about water in a global setting. So and I talked to this person. It was actually a very enjoyable conversation. I learned that many of the questions were related to, or at least that the framework in which I operated was one that would be amenable to addressing these questions. And at the same time, I understood that within water, that apparently there wasn't too much thinking that really took economics seriously, right? So I thought, okay, that's I mean, so this is something as a professor that I do. So I do research, I do teaching, and I always have like 5-10% of my time where I play, meaning I do something where I don't necessarily know where this will lead, right? So, but I allow it to give it a chance, right? So, and this was with water like this, right? So, we ended up giving a course together. We taught a course together on main grounds, right? So, and then we ended up writing papers together. Then, yeah, I started teaching the class. I mean, so at Darden, people thought that because there aren't really across MBA's programs, there are very few, if any, where you can take a class on water, right? So the school was open to it. It was like in the usual ways that we operate. It's like, look, if there is demand, if you can get students interested, sure, more power to you. Just go ahead, right? So this has been incredibly rewarding cooperation with that person. Brian Richter is his name, right? So we're actually currently we got an NSF grant, right? So National Science Foundation grant, $700,000, right? So this is a very prestigious grant, right? So he's also part of this, right? Where we have a team across a few universities that work on water. So yes, it started with a coincidence, but there has been a very rewarding 10 years working on water, both research-wise and in the class.
So we're talking about your economics of water elective, and you've been teaching this for a number of years. I wonder, how has the topic evolved since you've been teaching the class? Where you started to where you are now.
Well, obviously, since I'm not a hydrologist, right? So there has been lots of learning, right, on my part too, right? So the thing I like about the class is it's been really one of a give and take, right? So in different ways. So an important part of the class is the projects, right? So that are presented at the end of the class, right? So this has been incredibly rewarding because basically you have a set of very motivated students, right, who have an entrepreneurial streak, right? So who bring to my attention and to the attention of the other students, right, different topics from around the world. I mean, there's so much going on in water. There's no way I can cover all these topics, right? So in this way, basically, I learned a lot from them, right? So this has been very rewarding. And then another element in that case is that we had always one or two speakers, right? So I was very involved. I'm still in with the rest of the university, right? So we brought somebody who then stayed here for 1-2 days, sometimes longer, right? So I had conversations with them, and oftentimes wrote a case with them, right? So that basically now is that many of the cases surround or about topics or people that actually I've had or students have had a real interaction with, right? So it's I feel like it's increasingly a course that on the one hand gets you the framework, which I think is essential to think about water, right? So in this economic lens, at the same time, it's I think like it's increasingly anchored and grounded in and backed up by sometimes tough conversations that we've had while writing this, right? So in the last, so in September was probably one of the best runs we've had. I had an incredibly motivated group. I mean, it was really oversubscribed. I tried to, if I don't go beyond 50, but I mean, our ideal is 40 students, so that basically these projects can, but there was such a long waiting, so I pushed it up to 50, but there were still so many. So it was incredible, but I learned a lot, and it's when you have this conversation that starts, and there's a realization where, look, we can actually bring in new insights here. Nobody knows all the cases of water around the globe, right? So we can all contribute in a way. If everybody sees this, that look, this is like a public good here, right? And everybody chips in, then this is incredibly rewarding, and it's been really a joy, and also bringing in more things to focus on, right? Yeah, definitely.
We got a good question in the Q&A. You'd mentioned that a lot of folks, they start at the supply side of this question, and this idea that there will eventually be wars in the future about water, access to water. But then you said the importance of thinking about demand and how we think about using water and can we use it more efficiently. One of the folks who's here today asked, do you have an example, or maybe is there a case that y'all read that looks at someone, a company, a country really being efficient with the use of water, or interesting work around that question?
Maybe Brett, you can show this water graph that I mean, in a way, the question that's being asked relates to something I'm focusing on at this very moment, right? So we have this NSF grant, which is to study the Colorado River, right, where, as you know, we have a serious drought issue, right? So in the graph that I'm showing, right, is on the one hand, right, the supply, right? So this is the light blue, right? The supply, the water that's available for a very, very long period of time, right? So, and obviously there's variability in this. And then you have the darker blue, which is the water consumption, right? So what you clearly see is that water consumption has been steadily increasing, right? Steadily increasing to that extent, right? That's in the last 20 years, right? 20, 30 years, there have been quite a few instances where basically there's way much more water consumption, right, than there's water available, right? And then that's only possible because there are these reservoirs, right? These reservoirs we all learn about, right? So that are at historic low levels, right? Because we are basically overdrawing the balance that we have, right? So this is the challenge of the project, is also to see what we're gonna do about this, right? So how are we gonna bring demand more in line with supply, right? And so, and one of the things that oftentimes is an important factor is pricing, right? So people take water for granted, and I mean, the most outrageous example is Saudi Arabia, where basically they have so little water, use so much, and it's virtually available for free, right? So very long time it was like this. In the United States, still, in many instances, water is priced way too low, right? So there's no way that you can bring demand and supply in balance if you do not price properly. And this pricing signal is incredibly important, because it's not just about, all right, if I pay for water, then I'll probably save more water, but it's also the incentive it provides, right? The incentive for investing in saving water, right? Or the return on innovation, right? This is all tied to water. You talk to entrepreneurs, some in the US, they say sometimes that, look, why is it that the innovation in the water sphere is lagging? And to some extent, that's related to the fact that, look, water is not priced properly. So who's gonna be willing to invest in it, because there isn't a return, right? So yeah.
It's an interesting point about the connection between pricing and investing, or people moving into seeing this as well, an industry that they would want to innovate in. I had not thought about it in that way. You want to talk a little bit more about the work that you're doing out in the American West, looking at the Colorado River? There's been a lot of conversation about the extreme weather in this region of the United States. Certainly all the rain recently in California. There have been conversations about how do we capture precipitation when we have this kind of historic, like there's been just a lot of conversation around this region of the country and the disruption that's happening there. Tell us more about the work that you're doing.
So, and on the large, first macro, and then where we started, right? So is basically the nice thing is that it's an interdisciplinary approach, right? So we'll bring together reservoir operations. So we have an expert on that, right? So with, agriculture is really the most water intensive industry that we have, right? So how water is used in agriculture is incredibly important. So we have some people who really can measure very well how much water is actually used by agriculture, right? So, and then there's the question of how can we affect the reallocation of water, right? Is there potential for some more market type mechanism, right? For example, implicitly could be a fallowing program where you pay farmers, right, a given amount for the fact that they would not be using a part of their acreage, right? So that's the broad thing, or so like, how can we puzzle these together? Our way in, and that's where I'm working on currently, is very much trying to understand the very complex water rights system, right? So it's not like you and I could just go out and take whatever water we can. No, you've got to have that right to do it, right? So, and this is related to a very somewhat ancient or antiquated system, right? Where basically it's prior appropriation, right? So it's basically seniority. The older rights have the first pick at the water, right? So the amazing thing as we are looking at this is that, to my knowledge, people haven't actually looked at this very carefully, how this actually operates, right? So, and that's where we start, because or that at least where I start as part of the group to look at this water rights system. Is it actually working the way people say it is, right? So how is this working, right? So when if there are, the way this normally is that, look, if one very senior water right doesn't have enough water, it will place a call, right? So basically that will make sure that the more junior rights will have to give up their water so that the senior rights can be fulfilled, right? So how is this exactly working? Is it the way we think that it's you place a call and then the junior right gives up? Is that effectively how it is, right? So what determines that a senior right makes a call, right? So these very basic questions, and the surprising part is that even that's at the heart of the water distribution and redistribution. It's one that my sense is people haven't looked at too carefully. So this is potentially a project with quite a bit of mileage, I think.
Yeah, the interesting thing about water also is that it has this it's utility overlay. So you got the government involved, you've got this legal component to it, you've also got a market component to it, companies doing this, you have consumers, you have the broader societal context, environmental context. What role do you see government? When you think about this, how do you think about that government layer?
So there's one thing always where that in the end, because it's a public good and because it's an essential, water is essential for life, right? So that in the end, the government can step in, right? So if you really think, if you think, look, I'm gonna sit on water, right, and wait till it really gets so bad, and then I'll sell it at exorbitant prices, and I'll make so much money, right? So that there's a limit to this, because in the end, it's not your water. You have the right to the water, right? So, and if it really gets too far, a government can step in and will be asked to step in, right? So this, but of course, if the government steps in, there's got to be an agreement, right? There's politics then, right? So you got to agree to step in, and so in Colorado, the amazing part is, or along the Colorado, the amazing part is that you have this incredible drought, but it seems like it's still not bad enough till the agents get to cooperate, right? So, and also then, if a government steps in, it's got to, this is a political decision, right? So it's got to be backed up, because somebody will draw a line in the sand here, right? So it's interesting. The political economy is very interesting, right? So and at the same time, you can see, especially in a country like ours, where property rights are incredibly important, that if you are sitting on these senior rights, right? I guess you'll fight hard to give that up. I mean, that's at least what you see in the West. I mean, even if you would, where in a situation where you think that the extreme scarcity would have people see a common good or a common better future or a way of solving or addressing that, we are not there, right? So, and this is then a political dimension that enters the problem, right? So it's a question also then as a society, what are we willing to do to actually address that problem, right? And so, and we are at a very, very difficult spot in that regard, right? So, as I don't have to explain that to you, how currently in the US, there's not much of a taste for compromise, right? So, you see that to that extent that yes, in this very strange situation along the Colorado, that we haven't found a way yet. Yeah.
Well, Peter, I feel like we could keep talking about the economics of water. This is an infinitely fascinating topic, and one that obviously touches all of our lives, because water, as noted, is essential for life. I want to make sure, though, that we find some time to talk about your other elective that you teach, managing international trade and investment. I think this will also give us an opportunity to talk about a book that you recently published with your brother as well. But before we get to that book, tell us a little bit more about this course, managing international trade and investment. What's it all about?
Right. So, maybe I should start with focusing on the perspective, right? So basically, this is how we start the conversations, right? So I say, look, for business, open markets are incredibly vital, right? So basically, there is no business business needs the global economy, right? So you need to reach suppliers across the world, you need to reach demand across the world. So it's incredibly important. So, and I basically argue or say, look, the perspective of the course is that more than anybody else, we in a business school should understand how globalization works, right? So more than anybody else, because it's our bread and butter, we should understand this. And this implies, however, that we should understand the benefits, but we should also understand the drawbacks and the implications of globalization. And as long as we are only focused on how it benefits us and do not see the implications it may have that affect people adversely, we will have a very hard time to make the argument that we want to live and operate in a globalized world, right? So it's basically more, look, how can we, as a business community, preserve globalization that is currently a point of discussion, a point of contention, right? And then basically it's trying to unpack this, right? So see what's behind, what some of the driving forces of globalization are, what are some of the rewards, what are some of the understood implications that we'll have for reallocation, for inequality, right? So what the policy framework is, right? So we have to really understand this very much, and then also realize that yes, globalization has an impact on inequality, but it's certainly not the only one, and it's probably not even the most important one, right? So there's technological change, right? So there is access or unequal access to education, right? So there are different tax schemes that benefit people differently, right? So there's many other reasons why we have this massive inequality. But what's amazing is that a lot of people will actually pinpoint globalization or pick it out as one of the most important ones, right? So why is that, right? So that's basically a sometimes a difficult conversation, right? So where you see, look, all of us in business schools, especially, right, we stand to benefit from globalization, right? So we are typically fairly high-skilled labor, right, workers, right? So who reap more of the benefits from globalization, right? Multinationals have benefited quite a bit from globalization as well, right? So, but we should not forget that for lower skilled workers, there can often be a negative impact, right? So, and that multinationals, right, so have evaded taxes, for example, on a massive scale, right? So these are things that if we really want to preserve globalization, we will have to think about how, as a business community, we think about this, right? And so it is not about me preaching, look, this is what you've got to do. No, it's a conversation. I don't have the answers to this, but one thing is clear, that as we benefit from globalization, and if we want to preserve this, we, as a business community, should more than others understand its implications, right? So that's basically the gist of the course, and it's sometimes a very lively conversation, as you can imagine.
How do you make space for current events? I mean, I'm thinking about just where we are right now in the world. I'm dealing with a pandemic, what that has meant for some of these conversations. You got all the geopolitical stuff going on right now. You have, which is sort of moving into maybe even a potentially new ordering of the world and the global powers. How do you make space for these kinds of conversations in addition to all the other things you have planned for the course?
So that's not difficult. I mean, this basically bubbles up as we go, right? I mean, there are explicitly cases that deal with the trade policies of the last few years. So this is, this is really not, it's much more, the challenge is actually much more, you say, all right, let's take this step by step, right? So let's start over these 14 classes, let's start building up an argument, right? And then each time discuss that argument, but not right away think that, look, after one class, you can figure out the whole economy. I mean, this is not something that you can settle in a tweet, so to speak, right? So you got to have and it's the challenge in the course is more to pace people. Say, look, all right, I hear you. Let's have this conversation, but let's bring in what all we know in the field about it. Yeah.
Well, building on that, where do you start and where do you end in this course? Like, where's the starting point for students? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, so that varies, right? So you have students who are very literate in international economics, right? So and you have others who basically have questions, right? So what I find, the course is successful if it's the case that people realize that, look, it's a complex issue. I personally don't care where you end up. Well, I do, but that you're throughout the course, you're presented with lots of stylized facts and things that are irrevocably happening. If you want to take a position on globalization, you got to find an argument that takes care or considers all of these. That's basically the challenge, right?
All right, Peter. Well, I want to make sure we have some time to talk about your book, because I feel like this story around globalization is a real personal dimension to this. You want to tell us about the book that you wrote with your brother recently?
Yeah, maybe you can show my. So this is a project that basically started a bit as a a coincidence. I mean, it's a book that I've written with my brother, who's a historian, about my grandmother. Right. So, and it was just published in Belgium, and we are bringing it to the United States. And why is this an interesting story? I mean, apart from that, it's my grandmother, is that she came to the United States in the 20s and 30s, and she worked as a maid in the US, right? Especially a maid of rich people, and then she actually came back, right? So, and why this was something that was worthwhile writing a book about, because once there is the coincidence that we found a few years ago letters and documents and pictures, so lots of information, right? So, but it also basically is an opportunity to look at a very turbulent part of history, right, from the perspective of or following the sojourn of a maid, right, of an uneducated woman, right? So, which is not typically how history is written, right? So we found this as a very interesting opportunity to follow her path. At the same time, it's an incredibly turbulent period, right? So this is also an interesting period. This is the Jazz Age, and then you have the Depression, right? So, and it's very much a story about globalization, because she basically is in the United States as this massive flow of immigration from Europe comes to an end, right? Where you have an incredibly diverse population, right? The levels of migration, right, are the same now as they were then, right? So, and you have this very layered society where she's basically put in, right? So this is one. And the second part is that it's very much also a story about inequality, right? So not just because she works for these incredibly rich people. For example, one is the lawyer who negotiated the Panama Canal, right? So the other one is the family associated with Smith Barney, right? So the investment bank, right? So through her, you get a sense very much at this incredibly layered society with this, where some people are incredibly wealthy, whereas she as a maid has to navigate this, right? So and this is look, history does not repeat itself for sure, but there are parallels, things that you see that look, the inequality, the level of migration, especially the economic crisis that hit the 20s, I mean, after the Depression, right? And then here, right, we had the financial crisis, we had COVID, right? And so in these crises lay bare this incredible inequality, right? So, and there's a bit of a sense, right, that also, that until we solve some of these burning issues, it will be very hard to move forward, right? So, and if you saw that in the US, right, it's basically with the war and then the Great Society, right, this inequality really got shrunk, right? So, and there was a bit of a new social contract, right? So now obviously this is a bit the background of the story for us as well, right? So it's basically a conversation with her past, right? So bringing in personal things, because as you know, and this is a bit the challenge that an academic faces, we write fairly technical papers, right? So yes, we teach, where we try to translate, have a conversation with students about these issues, right? So, but there's also a broader public, right? So, and this was a bit an attempt on my part, together with my brother, to write a book that talks about, of course, my grandmother, but also globalization, inequality, and following the story of an ordinary woman, right? And try to narrate and talk about this in a different way. So it was incredibly rewarding, but it was a challenge. And I don't think without the COVID crisis, this book would have been here. It was more like, look, the first year, right? So you basically, we were all, right, fairly restricted in our social interactions, right? And that's basically where we were all figuring this out. There was a time with quite a bit of tension and uncertainty, and I tried to translate that tension or this anxiety in a productive way, and I just wrote, right? So this is a bit the story of the book, and it's a story of globalization about inequality, and that's why I think it goes beyond just telling her story. Even though my takeaway for her is like, what's I found surprising is that even though she was this uneducated woman, that she clearly made her own decisions, right? So she was not just floating on the waves of history, so to speak. So she made her own decisions, and even though you could already see that Europe, things were darkening there in the 30s, that she came back, right? So had her own reasons, and at the same time, it's a story that almost got lost. I mean, we knew about it, but really not much, right? And it also says something about the role of women, right? So that in a way, the model when she came back was the typical household where basically the man is the boss. He earns the money, right? And the woman steps back in second position, right? Takes care of the education of the kids, and even though she contributed significantly, also brought quite some saving back. So this really was not part of the narrative of her legacy, right? So that's a little bit the story. So, and we're working on bringing this to the US. So reception so far in Belgium has been quite good. So, but we got to work on the US now.
Well, I imagine it was, I mean, to learn, you probably learned all kinds of things about your grandmother that maybe you didn't know, or you maybe just had heard about but weren't sure about. I wonder, Peter, someone reading this book, what do you hope readers take away from it? You touched on a lot of different things, but at the end of the day, somebody closes the book. What do you want them to think about?
Oh, so I think there's really many different levels at which you can read this. One could be just focusing on her, right? So, and as I said, that even though she was this woman with very little education, was a maid, right? So that she worked her way through things, right? So, but I mean, you could also look at trying to figure out the society in the US and how it contrasts with a country like Belgium, right? So in this very layered society that I should say was also anchored in immigration laws that were very unfair, right? So I mean, I don't have to repeat this here, but we know Chinese people were excluded, right? So it was the case that also within the European migration population, right? So that the ones from Southern Europe, Eastern Europe, were the ones with a bit of a darker skin, the ones that had a different religion, right? So these were not welcome, right? Or they were welcome, but they were restricted, right? So in the even in the maid community, right, for the well-off people, you saw that yes, these were basically only the Belgian, German, Scandinavian, French immigrants that had these jobs, right? So if you were from Southern Europe, if you were from Eastern Europe, you had no space in this, right? So you could read this book and get a sense of, wow, I mean, what we now think of as the United States, this started off with a really incredible, I mean, not started off, but like in the 19th century and then beginning of the 20th, right? So it was an incredibly layered society, right? With stark differences, right? In a way that without making a cheap comparison, but that you see, look, the different ethnicities, right? So that we how we deal with them, how we accept them. That's an ongoing discussion, and clearly at the time that was. So there's some it's that could be a way of looking at this, right? So looking at this, then there could be a way of seeing how you have a Belgium, right, a small country as contrast, right? So, but that is also a country where that has its own past, right? So I don't have to repeat this. We know this. It's also a colonial country, right? So when my grandmother left, this was Congo was still the colony, right? So how does such a background inform a maid who also, I should say, was not only active in New York, but also spent some time in the segregated South, right? So there's lots of possible ways in which you can read this, right? So it's not for me to say this is the takeaway, but clearly I was informed by my expertise in globalization, and then pairing up with my brother, who's a historian, to say, look, given that we got this accidental trove of letters and photos and documents, to say, look, is there a way of looking at this life that was always in the background, right? So.
Well, Peter, it's been great talking with you. I feel like we could keep this conversation going for a while, but I want to wrap up here by asking the last question that we typically ask for our guests here on Office Hours. Undoubtedly, we've had some folks here on this session who've gotten interested in the topics that you've been talking about, things that you've shared here. What would you say 3 books that you would recommend for people to check out if they're interested in learning more, in addition to, of course, your book about your grandmother that will be in English in the not too distant future?
Yes. I mean, that's a bit of a difficult question, but so let me pick a few, right? So I'll pick 3. I'll restrict myself to 3, all right? I promise. So maybe on water, right? So there is a book on Israel, right? So Israel has faced really incredible challenges as far as water is concerned, right? So there's a book by Seth Siegel, Let There Be Water, right? That basically deals with it. And it's the nice thing about it is well written, right? So it gives you a very good sense of what the water challenges are and how they're being resolved within that context. And also, I mean, water touches upon many dimensions, right? Also, in this case, the international relationship, Israel and its surrounding areas, right? So how it could basically also make its knowledge of water and its expertise an incredible asset and exploit that in the region, right? So that's a beautiful book. Then on maybe in line a little bit about what I was talking about the book of my mother, and there's a nice short book by Gerber on American immigration, a very short introduction, right? That basically sketches a little bit the migration, largest migration so this big migration but then also up till now, right? What has changed, how we've dealt with it, and how it was anchored in societal debates. This is a nice little book. And then there is a third one that's more related to my GEM courses, right? So and it's a book by Krugman. It's the return of depression economics, and so he wrote this a while ago, right? So after the financial crisis, but I think it's incredibly important, like to understand where we are, right? Since I feel like our response to the financial crisis, right, in 2008, right, and then in part also a repeat of that with COVID, right, has put us, I mean, I'm not saying it's still the same questions, but I think, this book is a very nice way of starting to think about the challenges in an international context that economists, students of economists, MBA students, right, should be aware of, and will get a better view on after they've taken our German course, which is really, I should emphasize this is really a very nicely put together course that looks at the global economy through different cases from different countries, and this is a bit of an appetizer, I think.
Well, Peter, thank you so much for joining us for this session. It's been such a pleasure to our attendees. Thank you so much for taking an hour or so out of your Friday to come and listen and learn. As always, we'll share the recording of this conversation on our podcast, Experience Darden, and the Exec MBA podcast. So keep an eye out for it there. And of course, we'll also share it on our blog, Discover Darden. And thank you, as always, to Maggie Dodson for assisting with this session. It was great to have such an engaged group. Peter, lots of great questions in the Q&A about water. And certainly a lot of people were sparked around that topic. So unfortunately, we can't always get to them all, but it has been a wonderful conversation. And thank you all for your time. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. All right. Bye-bye.
And that was our recent office hours conversation featuring Professor Peter Debaere, a member of the Global Economies and Markets faculty here at the Darden School of Business. As always, if you have any comments, suggestions, requests, anything you'd like for us to cover here on the podcast, we're all ears. We can be reached at Darden, that's DARDEN, @virginia.edu. Till next time, stay safe, be well, and thanks for listening.